Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ian Watkinson, and I'm a National Executive Member and also Chair of our National Health and Safety Organising Forum. And it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our first session today, Online Safety and the Impact of COVID-19, part of day 2 of our National Health and Safety Month. And with that, I'd like to welcome and pass you over to our speaker and online safety expert, Carl Hopwood. Carl, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. Really good to be here. I always really look forward to this conference every year when normally we're in a hotel or at Stoke Rochford or somewhere like that. Sorry that we can't all be together this year, but really good to be asked to come back and give you an update. I think just to sort of get us started off, you know, we're being bombarded at the moment. There is so much going on in terms of e-safety, new threats, new challenges, and you know, clearly the COVID-19 sort of pandemic has had a huge impact as well. Some of you know I'm an ex-teacher and I'm still a governor in a primary school, and I just can't believe how much is happening and how much pressure there is and how much you guys are all having to do. So I want to try and make what I talk about in the next sort of session as useful as possible. I think, you know, also we're being told that on top of everything else that teachers have got to deal with, that they're equally having to deal with the sort of online harassment. So many of you will be familiar with the POSH helpline, the Professionals Online Safety Helpline, which is run by the UK Safer Internet Centre. And they, you know, have been talking about the increase that they've seen in calls about teachers who are being harassed online. And it's been about all manner of different things, from, you know, the sort of work that was being set during the first lockdown, to sort of not managing behavioural issues, to the satisfaction of a parent or something like that. And so I think it's a really challenging time for everybody. You know, we've already got the COVID stuff to deal with, but there's all of this stuff piling in on top as well. And I just wanted to sort of share a couple of things. We've had a lot of research, we've almost had too much, and you know, all I have to worry about in my job is online safety. I know you've got so many other things, so I just want to give you a brief summary, I think. And Internet Matters published this at the end of August. And, you know, I suppose it's not a surprise that over half of teachers were saying that the school wasn't ready to suddenly move into this emergency remote teaching. I don't think it was online learning. I think it was emergency remote teaching in many cases. And equally, you know, similar numbers found it very difficult to adapt what they were doing. And I think the support wasn't there at the beginning. I think, you know, we're very aware about the importance of a broad and balanced curriculum, and I'm still doing work in schools. I mean, I'm actually been into a school this week doing a face-to-face session, which is great, but most of the sessions are done like this on Zoom or Teams or something like that. And one of the things that does worry me is that I would argue, given where we are now, with a lot more sort of happening online, a lot more learning taking place online, even when we have got pupils in schools, you know, my daughter's school, all of year 9 are out at the moment because somebody has tested positive and so on. So I think it's a worry when schools are saying, yeah, the kids are so far behind, you know, we've got to just focus on the core subjects, try and get them caught up again. And so a lot of the things that I believe, and I'm sure you believe, are really important to a broad and balanced curriculum, including online safety, are perhaps being pushed to the sidelines, which I think is a problem. I think the other thing, which it's perhaps not online safety specifically, but I think it's important to mention in terms of context, is that, you know, I think we all kind of believe that all children, you know, even if they haven't got, you know, shoes that fit them or a coat without holes in, they've got a mobile phone. And that they may well have a mobile phone, but, you know, the research suggests that actually quite a percentage of children and young people just don't have access to the internet. And I think a lot of the online learning that was pushed out with the best of intentions from schools, it perhaps worked on a laptop or a desktop, but it wasn't very good on a mobile phone or on a tablet device. And I think even in those families where there was a device, there was one device amongst 4 or 5 people, which I think makes it very challenging. This sort of stat from the ONS, you know, 60,000 11 to 18-year-olds with no home internet connection in the UK. That's astonishing. And I think, again, when we sort of look at what we do moving into the future, I think we have to take that into account. So in terms of online safety, which is why I'm here, what do we know in terms of COVID and what it's done? Well, sadly, there has been a significant increase in online child sexual exploitation and abuse. I'm going to come to all of this in more detail. There has been an increase in cyberbullying. During the first lockdown, there was a significant surge in in-game spending and gambling. And there was some really interesting research from IFSI about children gaming during lockdown. And I think one of the positives from it, just an aside here, a glimmer of light, if you like, is that a lot of them said, actually, it helped me to stop feeling so isolated because I could still connect with my friends. And what I found really heartwarming is a lot of young people said, I actually ended up playing stuff with my parents and they'd never been interested in what I do in gaming before, but because they were at home sort of 24/7, suddenly they became interested, and hopefully that will continue. Massive issue around misinformation and fake news. I mean, that's quite timely given what is going on in America at the moment, and a significant increase of traffic to pornographic to adult sites. It wasn't as bad in this country as it was in France and Portugal and Italy, where Pornhub, one of the main providers, actually took away the subscription model for their premium site, and they saw, increases of over 50% in traffic. So if we go to the sort of online child sexual abuse stuff, those of you who've heard me speak before know that I think we have to be measured when we talk about this. And I've said in the past that I think those very blunt messages that we've given to children, which said, don't talk to strangers online, they're not fit for purpose any longer. Children do talk to strangers online, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to come to harm. Yeah, there's a risk, but it doesn't mean that they'll come to harm. The horrible quote, and I apologize for the sort of bad language in there, but this was something that Europol found online back in March. And there were a number of pedophiles, bad actors, predators, whatever you want to call them, who were openly saying, loads of kids are going to be spending loads more time online than they ever did before. We'd be stupid if we didn't seize on this opportunity to try and exploit that. That's really uncomfortable and unpleasant. For me, it's not a reason to never use the internet again, but it is a reason to look out for those children who we think might be vulnerable. It's a reason to reinforce some of these online safety messages. And alongside that, I'm sorry that this is not a good news story to start us off with, but it's really important to share this with you. The Internet Watch Foundation, who remove all of the harmful content from the internet, they found that back in April, there were 8.8 million attempts that were blocked from people in the UK who were trying to access child sexual abuse content on the internet. And the CEO of the IWF, a lady called Susie Hargreaves, this is her quote, and the scale of the issue of public demand is quite staggering. And again, you're all massively aware of what I'm going to say next, but I think colleagues in schools often think, well, that wouldn't happen here. And of course, we know that it can happen anywhere. And nobody likes to think that the person they sit next to in the staff room has actually been looking at this sort of content. But, I take you back to Simon Bailey's words from a few years ago. He's the Chief Constable of Norfolk who deals with this for the country. And he said, if you have a sexual interest in children, you will engineer your life to be in a position where you can get close to them. And sadly, we know that is true. And of course, the internet makes it a lot easier. The IWF have also identified quite a worrying trend. It's something that is being investigated as we speak. There's a big meeting of the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group, on this next Monday. And basically, they analyse reports that are sent in to them. And they found that back in 2019, there was about a third of their reports which contained self-generated images. So, basically the subject of the image, the young person has filmed it themselves. It hasn't been anybody else involved. And there was no adult physically in the room, as it says. 95% of them are girls. And incredibly worrying, 3/4 are aged between 11 and 13. Now, I think the point that we have to make here is that quite often this sort of sexualized behavior online, these self-generated images, they're not doing it because they're being paid, although sometimes they are. They're often doing it because they want people to tell them that they look good. They want people to sort of praise them. And I think, you know, it's a sad sign of the times that they're sort of influenced by popular culture that makes them think that, you know, wearing next to nothing is acceptable. But on platforms like TikTok and to a lesser extent Instagram, this is the sort of thing that we're seeing all too regularly. Again, just a quick selection of some of the headlines that we've seen during lockdown. You know, girls as young as 6 sexting. Yeah, I really don't think that's happening very often, thank goodness. But what I would say to you, and I've said this over the years, you know, where the sexting stuff was an issue in year 10 and then year 9 and then year 8, we are seeing more and more in primary schools, not everywhere, but we're seeing more of it happening just because they're getting these devices earlier. And I think when they're using some of the platforms, again, like TikTok, I think, you know, it does expose them to some fairly challenging content. So I think the question for us in schools, you know, if we've got a whole year group on lockdown, do we know who the vulnerable ones are? You know, do we kind of keep an eye on them? Are we able to put some support in place? And there is a correlation between offline vulnerability and online vulnerability, but actually there are others who perhaps can slip through the net. So this is something that we have to keep on top of. Another sort of trend in the same vein really is with a site called OnlyFans. So I don't know if you're familiar with OnlyFans, but it's one of these sites where you can actually put content behind a paywall and ask people to, you know, make a fairly small payment to access images or whatever. Now, it was set up by a guy in the UK about 4 years ago, but as you can see, the sort of the piece in the main part of the screen there, it's a BBC report, and this girl signed up when she was 16. You know, she was underage and she was sharing images, and we've heard a lot of young people say, well, I lost my part-time job during lockdown. I wasn't furloughed, I just lost my job, and actually it's a really good way to make money. I can share images and people can pay for them, and it's a secure payment channel, and I can make money. And of course the problem is they are being exploited. Sexting, just to give you an update really, we've talked about sexting over the years. This is recent research. This is June this year. 4% at the age of 13, rising to 17% of the 15 and older group who are actually doing this. So it hasn't gone away. It's still an issue. The sexting guidance, which was written 4 years ago, it's been rewritten, it's been updated, and I hope it will be more helpful to schools. I've been involved in the group that's put it together. It's been a job and a half, as you can imagine, to try and get the wording right, to try and get the information right. We had a meeting yesterday. It's waiting for ministers to approve it, and then it will be out, I'd like to say before Christmas, but certainly very soon after, if not. I also think that we have to be really wary of headlines, because I think they can give, you know, the wrong message. So this headline looks awful. So 2/3 of children being bullied on private sort of chat apps during lockdown. The actual reality of that headline is that it was 2/3 of children who were cyberbullied were targeted through these private messaging apps. Yeah, so, you know, it wasn't 66% of all children, it was 66% of a much smaller percentage of children. And the reason I wanted to sort of just highlight that is that I think for a lot of parents, the danger is that we scare them with these headlines to the point where they just lock everything down. That isn't going to be accepted by children. You know, they need to be in these online spaces probably now more than ever. And I think they will push back against it and then often do things underground without their parents being aware. I've mentioned different helplines to you in the past. This is another helpline run by the UK Safer Internet Centre. And the way that this one works is that if you've made a report to, I don't know, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and asked them to remove some content, and they've responded and said, yeah, thanks for reporting this, it doesn't violate any of our terms and conditions, we're not going to remove it. you can then report it to these people. And if they look at your report and think, yeah, you've got a point, that shouldn't be on the platform, they will then carry on the conversation with the social network on your behalf. And I think what is really good about that is where you and I would type something into an online form and click send, and then it's disappeared, we've got no idea where it's gone, they will actually pick up the phone and speak to a real person. And I think that is massively helpful. The other thing, which is probably obvious to all of you as adults, is that the tech companies have been affected by COVID-19 like we have. They can't have hundreds of moderators sitting in a room looking at content, so a lot of it's gone online. A lot of it's gone on to sort of technical moderation, and YouTube admitted, they said, we're probably leaving stuff there that shouldn't be left there. Equally, we are probably taking stuff down that shouldn't be taken down. So this is where the helpline, I think, can be massively useful. Just a sort of positive note, because I'm aware that what I'm talking about is all a bit grim. Ofcom's research that came out earlier this year, and I'm going to share a bit more of it in a second. One of the positive things that they found was that there'd been a rise, 6% rise in 12 to 15-year-olds who were using social media to kind of champion worthy causes and, campaign for things that were important to them. So I think that's really important, that it gives young people a voice, and it gives them agency to be able to sort of have some control over what's happening. As usual, what I wanted to do is give you a very quick overview of what the research says children are doing when they're online. And as usual, I'm choosing Ofcom's research because it's so well respected. There's a lot more to it than what I'm going to share here. And I'm just going to try and draw out some of the key points. But as I said at the beginning, there's a link to all of this. So 3 and 4 year olds, a quarter of them now have their own tablet device, which, is great, provided that when it was given to them, because these are real tablets, not ones that are made for 3 and 4 year olds, provided that when it's given to them, we've put some sort of safeguards in place. But, we know that that doesn't always happen. Down at the bottom there, it says that 51% are watching YouTube videos for, about 8 hours a week. If you break down what they're actually watching, a third of them are watching funny videos and jokes and pranks and challenges, and that rises to 3/4 of them by the time they get into their teenage years. So watching these sorts of things just becomes part of their DNA. Now, we've talked a lot about challenges in the past, and I think, as teachers, as professionals, we appreciate that the teenage brain, it hasn't developed to a point where they're going to think about, deal with, manage or understand risk or think about consequences. The prefrontal cortex, it's not fully functioning until boys are in their mid-20s, girls are in their early 20s. But what that means, of course, is that things that you and I would look at and say, yeah, I'm not going to do that because these things could happen, they will just do it. And when they're lying in hospital with a broken leg, then they'll think, that I shouldn't have done that. I should have realized that might happen. And I wanted to give you an example of one of the more up-to-date challenges. And sadly, I'm sure a lot of you will be very familiar with this one. It's called the Skull Breaker Challenge. Massive on TikTok before lockdown. And I think my point here is that, we can't have taboo topics. We need to be able to address these things in school. And so if I just play you one of the videos, 3 friends sort of say, we're going to have a competition, see how high you can jump. When their mate does it, they kick her legs out from under her, she falls over, everybody laughs. Now, to be fair, most of the videos on TikTok, they're not, horrific. Most people don't seem to get seriously hurt. But I've been into a number of schools, actually, earlier this year, where young people ended up in hospital, not seriously hurt, but, in one case, the boys who did it to their mate, they hadn't seen that there was a little sort of low wall behind him, and he fell back and cracked his head on the wall. So, I think it's hard because there is a sort of argument that says if you mention the online challenge, some of them will go and look for it and do it. But actually with this one, quite a few colleagues in schools said, will you mention it to them? Because actually, if you're the unsuspecting year 8 student who doesn't know about it and does jump in the air, you could end up coming to grief. So it's hard. And during lockdown, we saw another challenge on TikTok, which was really quite grim. And it was basically children were posting riskier and riskier and riskier content, and the competition was how much can you reveal of your body before TikTok removes it. And some of the images were highly inappropriate, and there were competitions going on between one school and another school. So again, just to kind of make you aware of some of those things. If we go back to the research, yeah, the numbers all start to go up, which isn't a surprise. I think the thing I draw out of this one is that 4% of the 5, 6 and 7-year-olds have a social media profile. You're meant to be 13, but, you know, this is what the national research was saying. And of course, you know, this comes down to parents, really, doesn't it? And I think, you know, if you've heard me speak before, I think parents are often the weak link. By the time they get into key stage 2, the numbers really rocket. So 37% now with a smartphone. And I think the big jump from not having a smartphone to having a smartphone is still between year 6 and year 7. But I think they're getting them an awful lot earlier in year 6 now. 21% have a social media profile. If you just looked at the 11-year-olds, it's 43%. And in terms of what social media, it's Instagram in the main, but it's TikTok. TikTok's the real big one that has moved forward. So just on TikTok, I'm sure most of you know what it is. It used to be called Musical.ly. It's really sort of developed a lot. Some of you probably saw the Panorama program on Monday. It wasn't good. And I think, in fairness to TikTok, I think the TikTok of today is very different from the TikTok of a couple of years ago, or even sort of 6 months ago. Somebody's just asking a question. Is there a similar place to report harmful content, to report harmful text messages? So, yeah, I mean, if the sort of text-based messages were being sent as a DM on Instagram or on TikTok or something like that, you could definitely report it to those people. What I would say to you is that the POSH helpline, the Professionals Online Safety Helpline, they would always be able to help you with that sort of thing. It doesn't matter whether it's about you or about a child or a young person that you're working with, they will be able to help with all of those sorts of things. I think the issue is that if it's a regular text message sent on iMessage, there isn't really anybody to report that to. So that's when I think you go to the regular helplines, the NSPCC, or you know, to the POSH helpline. There's also a question here from Jenny. I might as well just do these while I'm looking at them. And Jenny's saying, have there been any incidences reported of children with learning disabilities being vulnerable to sexting or online abuse? And I think in answer to that question, yes, there are. I work with a network of helplines around Europe, and this is something that we do see. And I think if it's interesting, one of the things I can share is we've got a Safer Internet Forum in 2 weeks' time, and the focus of the Safer Internet Forum is children and young people online who have disabilities, a whole range of disabilities. But there's been quite a lot of research done, and there's a report, and again I can share this, Jenny, called 2 Clicks Forward, 1 Click Back, which looks at the challenges that young people with a variety of disabilities face online and how we can sort of manage that and support them. And the other question there is about the risks of allowing families self-isolating at home to join live streamed Google Classroom. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about this because it's very difficult, isn't it? Because of course you don't know who is looking at what you're doing in these live streamed sessions. And that's why I think schools need to have very, very clear policies. Yes, for the teachers delivering it, but also for the other people who are engaging or perhaps watching in the background. And I think we just have to be incredibly careful. We've had instances where live lessons have been live streamed onto Facebook and YouTube, and then people have made comments and so on and so forth. So I will come back to that, Jenny, and I'm going to sort of signpost to a couple of other bits as well. So going back to TikTok, one of the things that happened on TikTok earlier this term, which I'm sure most of you saw, there was a suicide clip that was shared really widely. And it was the suicide of a guy called Ronnie McNutt. And it was initially shared on Facebook, but it found its way onto TikTok, and a lot of young people saw it. TikTok were really good. They acted very quickly to remove it. But, you know, they said to me, a lot of bad actors were recreating the content, hiding it inside other videos isn't uploading it again. And the point I would make here is that even though I'm pretty confident that stuff isn't there any longer, the screenshot on the right of your screen, that was taken only a few days ago. And so people are still talking about this and, you know, talking in quite explicit language about it. If your child's only 11 or 12 or 8, you know, you don't want them to be exposed to that. You know, there is a 13 age limit, but it's just disregarded by so many people. Other things on TikTok, this was a horrible thing. This was done by parents. So, you know, this is what we're up against. At the beginning of the school year, there was the NEU teacher challenge, and parents were showing their children a photograph of somebody with a disability or a facial disfigurement, perhaps, and then sort of saying, this is going to be your new teacher, and videoing the child's reaction. And in some cases, especially with younger children, they were shocked, they were scared. And then parents posting this and laughing at it and so on. Another trend where, you know, young people on TikTok were sort of posing as sort of concentration camp victims and so on. Incredibly distressing, you know, appalling really. Beauty treatments, DIY beauty treatments, telling you how to whiten your teeth with bleach, and, you know, beauty hacks that could cause, you know, permanent harm and so on. And then this strange one. Again, parents throwing cold water over their baby or their young child and then filming the reaction. And the reason I wanted to share this one with you is that TikTok sort of said, this is quite hard for our moderators, because clearly in some of these cases, the child was kind of in on the joke. You know, they were laughing and it was just a nice family moment, but clearly that wasn't always the case. And actually, it's sometimes quite difficult for a moderator to be able to distinguish between the two. So what I'm trying to say is, I've picked on TikTok. Any platform like this with user-generated content, it can be really quite challenging, and children can be up against all sorts of content. And yes, it'll be removed when they identify it, but it isn't always picked up before time. With all of the things that I'm talking about, and I think we've discussed this in previous years, girls always, you know, they come higher up the statistics, so they're more likely to be victims of cyberbullying. They are more likely to be affected by negative comments and coercion. They are more likely to be involved in sexting. And this was some research from Girl Guiding that found that a third of 11 to 21-year-olds wouldn't even post something online unless they used a kind of filter or an app to enhance it. And the similar number said that they would actually just delete content if it didn't get enough likes, if it didn't get enough attention. If we finish the research here, the 12 to 15-year-olds, so now the numbers are almost universal. We've got 83% with a smartphone. If you just looked at the 15-year-olds, it's in the high 90%. So basically, if you don't have a device, you're very much in the minority. 71% on social media, 90% on YouTube, 74% who own a mobile phone are allowed to take it to bed with them. And that equates to 63% of all 12 to 15-year-olds. And again, we've spoken about this before. And I think that's a challenging figure, because, you know, those young people are going to be coming into your classrooms in the morning, hardly able to keep their eyes open. You know, it's impacted on their sleep, and it has a huge, you know, knock-on effect to all sorts of different things. So I've shared this with you before, the guidance from the Chief Medical Officer. I think it's a great thing to send home to parents, because it kind of, it reinforces, hopefully, some of the things that they're saying. You know, she's saying to people, don't leave your phones in the bedroom when it's bedtime. Don't have, you know, phones at the dinner table. All those things that you would just hope would be kind of common sense. We've had some more research since I last spoke to you. So this came out in January this year. Royal College of Psychiatrists. For the first time, they put some time limits onto, you know, screen time. So under 1, no screen time is the advice. Up until the age of 5, no more than an hour a day. What is interesting is that beyond that, there are no time limits. And this was pre-COVID, remember. But I think since we sort of started with the pandemic, a lot of experts, you know, people like Sonia Livingston and so on, have said, actually, we shouldn't be talking about screen time. It's just the wrong approach. We need to talk about screen use. And I think that's why it's good that it says from 5-year-olds upwards, have a balance of activity between face-to-face stuff and the online stuff. Nobody can take away the role that technology has played in this pandemic. You know, it's how we kept in touch with people who weren't living with us during the first lockdown. It's how, you know, you guys carried on educating the nation. It's how people kept on running their businesses and so on. The other things that come through from 5 to 11 and 11 to 16 is tech-free meal times, no screens in the bedroom at night, and also engineering opportunities for children to talk about things that have gone wrong. And what I would say is that, you know, in an ideal world, parents would do this, but we know they're not doing it. I mentioned that network of helplines that I work with around Europe. And, you know, they sort of predicted that when lockdown was lifted, they were going to see a surge in young people coming forward who couldn't contact a helpline when they were at home because somebody might have been listening. And it happened, sadly, and they didn't have anybody to talk to. So I think this is where schools have such an important role to play. And I think they are stepping up. I think there's been a lot done in terms of well-being and emotional support, but I think it needs to carry on. It needs to persist. And I think the problem is when colleagues are so, you know, beaten down by everything that they're having to deal with. I think this is just another very important, but another sort of challenge for them to try and face. The government, goodness, you don't need me to tell you, probably taking a risk even putting this slide up here, but the government are constantly bombarding you in schools with information, very often, you know, the night before it needs to be enforced and so on. I just wanted to highlight that they've published quite a lot of stuff around the internet. It's all included on this PDF that I'll share with you afterwards. This guidance for parents, really good, but actually let's share it with parents, otherwise they don't know that it's there. They're not following, you know, the DFE on Twitter like many of us probably are. And actually it was good guidance. You know, they were saying, you know, have those conversations with your children. Don't just block everything. Make sure they'll come and talk to you if something goes wrong. And equally, and I thought this was real good common sense stuff, a lot of our children, and probably a lot of us, were suddenly having to use new apps and platforms and video conferencing services. And I think when, you know, these sort of need to be used, let's set them up with our children. Let's do it with them so that we can make sure that the right privacy and so on is in place. So it brings me to keeping children safe in education. And, you know, for years now, online safety has just been running through Casey, which I think is right. And we've talked about that in the past. There was a subtle addition in paragraph 92, and it talks about, you know, schools and colleges spending more time online, which is still the case today. And it says that it's essential that children are safeguarded from, you know, harmful, inappropriate content online. Great. So at school, by law, we have to do filtering and monitoring. And again, we've talked about that in the past. I'm not going to go into it today, but if colleagues want more information about what good filtering and good monitoring looks like, I can share that with you. There are documents referenced from Casey that talk about that. But it's now saying that we need to be mindful about how we keep children safe online, including when they're online at home. I mean, you know, how on earth are you supposed to do that? There's not going to be filtering and monitoring in the same way at home. Very often we know that children have completely unfiltered, unsupervised devices. But I think what we have to do in schools is provide a bit of evidence to say that actually we have done some things. We have put some things in place to try and help and support parents to, you know, keep their kids safe when they're at home. I think the equity of provision is really important. I mentioned before, you know, are we aware of those children who are vulnerable? And I think in response to Jenny's question, you know, I hope schools have done this, but I have been into a couple this term where it hasn't really been done properly. We need to have really robust policies in place for these remote learning, the live lessons, whatever it might be that we're doing. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail in a minute about perhaps what they need to contain. And the good news is there are templates that schools can take and adopt. We had issues at the very beginning of lockdown where schools were saying, well, what can we use? Oh, there's a bloke on our staff, there's a lady on our staff who says Zoom's really good, so let's just use Zoom. And then, of course, we had, you know, local authorities who said, you can't use Zoom, or you have to use this, or you have to use that. And I think we're hopefully finding a way through that now, but everybody needs to be aware of how it works. That bit about discussion, dialogue, open channels of communication, we need to make sure that there are spaces for children to have those conversations. It's great that RSE is compulsory. It was meant to be from September. There's a bit of wriggle room now, isn't there, until next summer, just because of COVID, which I understand. But I do think that online safety, you know, it needs to be top of the list, really. The other thing, this is anecdotal now, this is just from me and the contacts that I've had with schools, and I'd be interested to know whether you're seeing this yourselves. A lot of colleagues are saying to me that children came back in September, and first of all, there were issues because they couldn't put the device down because they'd been used to being glued to it during lockdown. That was a challenge. But I think equally, they felt that behaviour had gone downhill a little bit, and quite young children were making inappropriate gestures, using inappropriate sexualized language, and it appears that this is because of some of the stuff they've been exposed to on some of their social media platforms. So that whole issue about children becoming desensitized, I think, is a challenge. A lot of the guidance that you will be very familiar with in your roles was updated. So the guidance on safer working practice, which I think is such a useful document, they updated that, and there was an update to the use of tech, particularly for online and for virtual teaching. Excuse me, and it talks there in the bottom right-hand side of the screen that we need to talk about how staff are attired and so on. We need to say to children, where are you actually going to be taking part in the live lesson? Are there people likely to walk through in their pajamas because they didn't realize? And it's all this common sense stuff, but I think it just sometimes needs to be reminded and to be sort of reinforced. There's a lot of guidance that's come out from the UK Safer Internet Centre, a lot more than you can just see on the screen, but it tried to just talk about things that schools should be doing, and it tried to talk about some of the checks and the balances that you might need to have. This that you can see on the screen here, this is from Kent, and Kent sort of online safety is world renowned. They're really good at this. They publish some really excellent guidance. They've been taken over by the education people, and sadly some of it has gone behind a sort of paywall now, but they managed to get this into the public domain, and I'm very happy to share this. I think, as I say, most schools have done this now, but even if they've got a policy in place, this would take them through and just check that the right things are in the policies. And it's the classic stuff that we've talked about every year when I've done these sessions about, you shouldn't be using your own device. You definitely shouldn't be using your own device to do live learning and so on. But some schools are saying, well, you have to, because actually the laptops we've got are rubbish and they can't do video conferencing. Well, that's fine, but make sure it's clear in the actual, documentation, what it is that we're doing. Make sure, that you've had a conversation about, well, is it going to be recorded? And if it's going to be recorded, have you told everybody? And why is it going to be recorded? And where's the recording going to be stored? And how long is it going to be kept for? All of those things need to be considered. And as I said in response to one of the questions, be very aware that I might think that I'm talking just to 9S, but actually there could be all lots of other people there, and you might have that parent who's got a bit of a gripe with the school and is looking for the smallest thing to sort of make an issue out of. So anybody could be watching, and I'm sure that our behaviour wouldn't change, but I think it's always important to have that there in the back of our mind. Again, some really useful ones here. This was a real quick, and they did this very early on in lockdown from the London Grid for Learning, safeguarding considerations. Do students know how they can ask questions? I did a session in a school last week, and they said to me, oh, we're going to really nail down Teams so that they can't unmute and things like that. And I said, well, I'm happy if they want to ask questions. And they said, oh, but we had Vince Cable. It happened to be Vince Cable was doing a talk to the school, and apparently partway through, one of the students just decided to mute him, and the person who was controlling it couldn't unmute, and it just turned into a nightmare. And I hope we've kind of got past most of those things now, but the same expectations for behaviour on a Zoom call or a Teams call as there would be in the classroom. A lot of guidance. So the Children's Commissioner published this guidance, and I always just think with this, if it's there, let's give it to the children. It really good, simple, straightforward stuff. You wouldn't open the door to strangers, so actually, you should be using passwords to access online meetings and things like that. You all heard the Zoom bombing stuff, and there were some horrific stories about that. From what I can see, and I've read a lot of research that's been done on it, it was because people didn't set the Zoom meeting up in the right way. The password was out there on social media, people shared it with others, and that's why it went wrong. Parents, again, going back to that paragraph 92, let's send them the information home, and at least we can prove and evidence that actually we have tried to put some support in place. Again, the government have got the National Cyber Security Centre. They published this stuff for people who were home working. Why not give it to our staff? Why not give it to our parents? You know, let's just make them aware of this sort of thing. If we go back to keeping children safe in education, it references online safety in there, as I've said, and they talk about how you might want to deliver online safety. And they reference a number of different documents, so teaching online safety in schools and education for a connected world in particular. The Teaching Online Safety in Schools document, these are some of the main points from it. And they talk about, they recommend, in fact, that schools should be embedding online safety throughout the whole curriculum. So again, I've said this to you before, but you know, it shouldn't just be sitting in the lap of the IT department. And even now that it's part of the RSE curriculum, it shouldn't just be sitting in the lap of the RSE, the PSHE teacher. It's a whole school issue because it's about safeguarding. But I also think when all of these statutory bits of stuff that come out from government are referencing things like education for a connected world, we need to be paying attention to it. And I just wanted to sort of flag the point that education for a connected world, it has been updated. So it was updated. There's a 2020 version. It came out just before the summer holidays. And, you know, we only wrote this in 2018. And within 2 years, there was just quite a lot that had happened. We tried to future-proof it, but you know, things like deepfake technology, which I talked to you about last year, the rise in artificial intelligence and the rise in use of artificial intelligence, just all stuff that I think we kind of need to take account of. For those of you who don't know Education for a Connected World, just very quickly, what they've done is they've mapped out the skills and competences that children and young people from 4 to 18 need to have across these 8 different areas of online safety. And there's a whole series of different statements. One of the statements, which it's become very clear schools weren't as good at, was the privacy and security stuff. And I think, you know, I mentioned the National Cyber Security Centre earlier on, but I think that was something that, you know, we've really seen a sort of push on this year because there's been such a rise in scams and malware and so on. Again, you know, I wanted to give you a quick example. On the right-hand side of the screen there, some of you might have seen this because back in March, this video, it was shared virally. It was on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, shared on WhatsApp millions of times. And it allegedly shows an Aldi supermarket in the Netherlands being besieged by people who've heard the country's about to go into lockdown. There's no loo roll left, they're panic buying, there's no pasta, there's no rice, so they've got down there to stock up. Now, because it was shared so virally, Bellingcat, the investigative journalists, they looked into it to sort of see if it was real or not. And to cut a long story short, they discovered that this Aldi supermarket, it's actually in Germany, not in the Netherlands. And they worked that out by zooming in to one of the stills that they took from the video. And they saw a poster in the window, but the language was in German, not Dutch. They then, you can probably see in the picture, you see where it says FBI next to the supermarket. So FBI, it turns out, is a very small chain of about 6 hairdressing salons in Germany. They very helpfully have a website that shows where all of these places are. And Bellingcat got in touch with FBI and showed them the picture, the video. And they said, yeah, it's in Kiel in Germany. It's not in the Netherlands, but the video's old. And Bellingcat sort of said, well, how do you know the video's old? And they said, because back in 2018, we rebranded and we changed our logo and all of our shop fronts were updated. And we can actually tell you the date that that one in Kiel was updated. And it was apparently sometime in mid-2018. Now, to cut a long story short, the video that was shared, which alleged to be people panic buying because of COVID, it was first videoed in January 2011. And the reason that people are outside that shop is because there was one of these sales where you could get a flat screen TV for €100 or something crazy like that. So they were there to get a bargain. But the newspaper report on the left of the screen, the research back in August found that if we see a friend of ours or somebody we're connected with on social media sharing content like that, the panic buying, 2 things happen. we are more likely to believe it without question, and we are more likely to share it. And of course, then we're contributing to mass panic and so on. And I don't know about you, but I've seen, certainly on Twitter in the last few days, more pictures of empty shelves, and equally people saying that was in March, though. Don't try and pretend that that was, in November 2020. So I think these are all important messages for children, but actually they're important messages for us as well. And I have to say, some of you will be tasked with delivering lessons around fake news. And I do get a bit frustrated when people come up with these resources and say, oh, just teach that lesson on fake news and then the children will know what they're doing. I don't think it's that easy to distinguish between fake news and stuff that's genuine. I think it's really quite difficult, and I think it has to be an ongoing conversation. Project Evolve is something I mentioned last year, and if you go back to Education for a Connected World, that framework with the skills and competences, Project Evolve has been evolving, I suppose. It's been growing over the last few months, and it's now free to all schools. There's over 1,000 schools who've signed up in the last month or so. You need to register, but once you've registered, it is free. And they've basically taken all of the statements in Education for a Connected World, and they've produced a resource. So, here the statement is, I can recognize and discuss the pressures that technology can place on me and how and when I think I should respond. Brilliant. There are questions that you can ask, and that might be all you need. You just need those as a teacher to have a conversation around it. But they've also got resources. They've got videos, they've got lesson plans, they've got, the worksheets, the sort of cards that you might need to print off. And I think, it's definitely not suggested that people would go through every single one of the lessons. You'd never teach anything else. There's that much there. But I think, the planning's been done. It's free. You don't need to sort of spend a lot of time planning it. And the next bit of development is going to be an assessment tool as well, which I think is great, because I always say to people, how do you know whether the online safety that you're doing has been effective or not? And I think that's hard, but this is going to provide a solution. The other thing that you may have seen is that the DFE, back in towards the end of September, they published their PowerPoint presentations, actually, to train teachers in how to deliver the various bits of the new RSE curriculum. I don't know if any of you have looked at them. 88 slides in one of them. I think they're quite dry, let's just say. They might be fairly sort of accurate, but I'm not sure. And, to be fair, I haven't used them with teachers because I use my own stuff. But I think they're quite dry, and I'd be interested in how effective they are. But what I'm trying to say is, they're giving us lots of guidance. They're giving us lots of what they hope is helpful support. I wanted to just spend a few minutes now just quickly reminding you of some of the resources that have been created by the UK Council for Internet Safety. And, if I was there in person, I've done this every year, and I always say, how many of you have heard of the UK Council for Internet Safety? And the numbers are growing, but I think when I did it wherever we were last year, I think it was only about 5 people out of a room of 20 or 30. So, the UK Council for Internet Safety, it's a government organisation which is chaired by DCMS as well as DFE. They've published quite a lot of really useful guidance. So one of the things that came out only a couple of months ago is this online safety audit for trainee and NQTs. And it's free, and it's just, sort of saying, well, if you are mentoring, an NQT or a trainee teacher, here's some things that you might need to talk to them about connected with online safety. So, just really important. I did some training for a skit course back in September, and, they just weren't aware that it existed, and that probably wasn't their fault. I think there's so much stuff, but, if I just flip back to the previous slide, it's coming from the UK Council for Internet Safety, not DFE specifically. One of the other things that they've done, and I've shared this in previous years, but it's been updated, which is why I wanted to highlight it again. So these are questions that governors might want to ask the senior leadership team in the school about online safety. And I think in previous years, I've shown you Ofsted reports where governors have been slated for not knowing how the school was managing filtering and monitoring of the internet and so on. And on the right-hand side, you can see just a part of the document. And so, it gives you the question. So, have we got up-to-date online safety policies? Are they clear and understood? And it says what good practice would look like, but it also talks about when a governor should be concerned. And that one, the second bullet point in there, the policy is generic, not specifically relevant to your school. I'm a governor in a local primary school, and they sent me the online safety policy so I could have a look at it, which I was happy to do. And I said, is this ready? Is this the one that you think is ready to be published? And they said, yeah. And it still had the name of a previous school on it, so that just says to me, we haven't looked at it properly. We haven't made sure that it's actually bespoke and talking about what we actually do. And the point I would make, of course, is that the guidance is there. We can give people the templates, but they do need to work through them. Early years, again, this came out last year, but two specific documents, one for early years professionals and one for setting managers as well, talking about the types of issues that could affect children at that age, talking about the things that staff might need to be careful of, talking about, the use of mobile devices and where you can take images and things like that. And again, we're just awash with content, and I'm very mindful that I'm struggling to keep on top of all of this, but it's my job and all I worry about. You've got all the other stuff as well. This came out only a couple of weeks ago. So it's the kind of keeping children safe in education bit for the kind of community activities, the after school clubs and things like that. And of course, it's got references to, the internet and online activities. And colleagues just need to be aware of it. I know a lot of them are volunteers and things like that, but, the book will ultimately stop with somebody at the school if it's being done under their sort of umbrella. So again, a new document, something to get our heads around. If we're familiar with Casey, this is not a big leap forward, but it may be a big leap forward to some colleagues who are running these things. And a couple of other documents that have come out since I last spoke to you that I thought were just worth flagging to you. So this one came out, it is what it says on the tin, I suppose, when do I need to call the police? And we've spent a bit of time in the past talking about, that in relation to sexting, and, there's some quite clear guidance on that. And, it's cybercrime there. It's going to talk about the things that could go wrong within a school setting. And then there's also a flow chart to talk about, the things that you might need to do before arriving at that final decision. The other thing that came out back in February was this guidance for schools and colleges, which is specifically written by the Met, but is meant for any school or college in the country. And it's particularly around, the three things that you can see there on the left, but there's some specific guidance in there for sexting as well. And I said to you that I'm part of the group that's been updating the sexting guidance. And actually, when this stuff came out, we actually didn't know about it. And CEOP were a little bit sort of, what have they done? They've published this stuff and they haven't checked with us. It's actually very good. And I think, that they clearly have spoken to the right people because it gives the right messages. But it's just another bit of guidance, for a DSL to try and get their head round. I just want to also give a nod, and I think we always try and do this, to reputation, to staff getting things wrong. And you're the experts at this. You are the people who are having to deal with, colleagues in schools who perhaps made a mistake. This was actually something that happened only a couple of weeks ago, and this was shared with me by a colleague in a school I was working in recently. So I'm not a Strictly fan. I apologize, I just don't watch it, but I am aware that there's been a lot of stuff in the press around that there's a partnership which is a same-sex partnership, and apparently that's the first year it's happened. This lady, Libby, she sort of publicly says on Twitter, I'm not interested in your PC same-sex dancing, so I'm not going to be watching this any longer. And you can see that, 83 people rather have commented, and she's had a few retweets. Now, Libby happens to be, we know a lot about her because she's put it on social media. She's a wife and a mum of 2 grown-up children, well-balanced, and she's a proud grandma, which is lovely. She's not a prolific Twitter user. She's got 500 and odd followers. But you can see there that now this particular tweet has got 253 comments. Move across to the right, it's got 281 comments. You know, clearly people have been a bit unpleasant to her because of what she said, and she's saying, well, look, Graham Norton can say that, why can't I say it? But then other people are starting to retweet, and things are starting to get out of hand. So she protects her tweets. She blocks doesn't block everybody, sorry. She makes the account private, so only the people who follow her can see the tweets. However, Jack White is very keen to sort of say, it doesn't matter that you've made your account private because we've got the screenshots, and I found out where she works, and it is in a school in Cornwall, and I bet they'd love to know that a teacher who works for them is homophobic. So I'm going to email them. Why don't you? Here's the email address. Here's the phone number. And of course, this is, you know, you've seen this so many times, I'm sure, in your work, but actually this is what, you know, people don't realize, how quickly things can escalate. And if you went and looked at the website, there is Mrs. Shepherd, you know, she probably shouldn't have said what she said, and you know, I'm not condoning it, but there she is listed as supply teacher. The following day, she is no longer on the website, and the school are massively keen to say, yeah, you know, we want to uphold British values and encourage respect and tolerance, and you know, we really want to sort of tackle stereotyping and prejudice, and you know, they're hashtagging it strictly 2020 because they're aware of what has happened. Now, whether she was kicked out, whether she resigned or what, I don't know. But the point is, this stuff matters. And I think, you know, it's so easy, isn't it, to get it wrong. The throwaway comment that you might say to somebody who's on the sofa next to you, whether that's okay or not is irrelevant. But when you put it online, you have to deal with the consequences. And I just thought it was an interesting example as to how easily this could go wrong. The other thing, and I'll finish with this, I think, is that, you know, there's a lot of scams going around. That was on the very first slide, I think, that I showed you. And in the past, I have shared with you an example of this scam, and it's come back this year with a COVID-19 flavor to it. So I'm just going to very quickly remind people of the scam, because there could be some people who haven't heard me speak before. It's a well-established scam. You get an email that says, a couple of months ago, we installed some malware onto your device, and since then, we've been videoing you through the webcam. We've got hours of video footage. Some of it's very embarrassing. We're going to put it up on the internet. We're going to share it with the people you work with, your family, your friends, unless you pay us a certain amount of money, in Bitcoin. Now, I think at this point, nobody thinks that they've been videoed. If you were worried, put a post-it note or a bit of blue tag over it. It's not difficult. But the old version of the scam was that your email that you got would have your password in it. And that's really worrying to people. You know, I remember talking to a teacher only a few weeks ago about this, and she said, you know, I'm pretty careful. And she said, but, you know, my laptop is always open. She said, I never close it down. I live on my own. She said, and sometimes I'm wandering around not wearing very much, but it's my house and there's nobody there. And she said, when I got the email saying that they'd been videoing me and then my password was there, she said, I got shivers down my spine and I thought maybe it's real. And then she started to worry about that. And of course, that's what they're hoping is going to happen. The COVID-19 twist is that all the same stuff happens, and they say, if you don't pay the money, the videos will go up online and we will send you a package to your home address, and then your home address is written in the email, which is pretty scary, and it will be infected with coronavirus. Now, you all know that, you know, we've had the research, we kind of know that, you know, that's the virus doesn't last very long on parcels and envelopes and stuff like that, so we don't need to worry really. But, you know, what you're probably also very aware of is that there are a lot of people using technology in the last few months who didn't use it very much before. They're not confident users. You know, a lot of our elderly parents or people who are a bit more vulnerable are using it. And again, they're being exploited. And I just wanted to explain how the scam works. Basically, every day there's a story like this. So, you know, it could be Facebook who's lost data, or TikTok or WhatsApp. This one happened to be the people who provide the free Wi-Fi in stations, which I definitely have taken advantage of. This was loyalty card schemes. You know, basically people that we give our data to aren't always careful with our data. And when there is a data breach or it's leaked or whatever, it ends up on the internet in a thing called a paste bin. And these are just places that hackers know about. And the police were telling me that the criminals behind the scam, they've created a bot, a piece of technology, and it goes to these paste bins on the internet, and it gets the information that it needs to ping out apparently tens of thousands of emails an hour to you or to me with our name in there, so it's personalized, and then with the all-important password or physical address. And then they just sit back, and they only need a few people to panic and think, oh, you know, I need to pay, and they're making money by doing absolutely nothing. And they are making money. You know, some of these Bitcoin wallets have got, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in them. There is a solution, and I think I've mentioned this to you before. Have I been pwned? You put your email address in there, you click search, and it will tell you whether your email address and the password that goes with it has ever been involved in a data breach. And I think if you tried it, I think most of you would find that it has been in a data breach, and it's not your fault. It's just because people aren't careful with our data. This is what the results look like. So I was in a school a couple of days ago, and I used their admissions@ email address, and it had been breached, 2 breaches. And you can see the bottom one, it's the email address and the password that was leaked. But in the top one, it was phone numbers, it was physical addresses, it was, you know, social media profiles. And I think, again, if that happens, you just change the password. That's the important thing. So the very last bit, just the last couple of minutes, and then hopefully we've got some time for some questions. The National Cybersecurity Centre, I mentioned before, they have provided a lot of information for schools, for individuals, for organisations, and I'm just going to quickly share some of them with you. The main email, the important email account that you have, the one that you use for online banking, the one that you use to apply for jobs, the one that you use to online shop at Amazon, that password shouldn't be used anywhere else. And you know, the reason for that is what I've just explained. If you're using the same password for multiple accounts, then it only needs one of those accounts to be breached, and then your password is out in the open. We should be using the latest version of software on a phone, on a tablet, and the reason for that is that there are data breaches. You know, there are security flaws, and the companies fix them, but only if you're using the latest version. Here's an example. The headline looks pretty grim. It wasn't quite as bad as that. If you had a screen protector, a certain type of screen protector on that phone, any fingerprint did unlock it. I mean, that's terrible. And of course they fixed it. Equally in this case, the face unlock on that phone worked even if your eyes were closed. I mean, that's not good. They've fixed it. If I'm not using the latest version of the operating system, I'm not benefiting from the fix. And some of you are probably quite rightly saying, yeah, well, my phone automatically updates, and they do. But if you're using an older phone like I am, you know, you might need to go and look for them. This was Android, and they said, you know, we will update for a couple of years, but then it kind of expires. Two-factor authentication, I'm sure that you're all doing that. It's a lot better and easier to do than it used to be. We should be doing it on bank accounts and social media accounts and email and things like that. They will verify that it's genuinely you through a text or an authentication app. Password managers, I think these are really good. You know, you need to remember one long, complicated password, and then the password manager does the rest for you. And when you're signing up to buy some stuff from some online retailer and they say, now choose a password, and that's when you think, oh, what shall I use? Oh, I'll use the password I always use and put 01 at the end of it, or my date of birth, or my child's name. That's when it goes wrong. The password manager will create a password for you, and you don't need to remember it. It's stored in a vault. Screen locks, absolutely. All I would say here is 3 of the top 10 most commonly used passcodes on a screen are 1234, 0000, or 2580, because it goes straight down the line on the keypad. So yeah, it's just about being careful. And the last one, backing up data. I'm sure that most of the stuff that we do within school is backed up to a cloud-based server. But what about on your personal device? You know, what about if you lost all of that? It happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I'm using a new laptop now, and I'm pleased that it is working. I'd had a laptop, been using it for a couple of years. I was doing a parent presentation on Zoom, and the laptop just switched off, and it's never switched on since. I'm looking at it now. It's just useless. But I do back up, but it wasn't automated, and it had been about a week since I'd last backed up, and that was a nightmare. And fortunately, a friendly IT department in the school did manage to get the hard drive out and retrieve it for me. But you know, what an idiot. And so I do back up every single night now, because you just never know when it's going to happen, and hopefully it won't happen again, but it did. Last 2 slides now, I promise. What's new? It's always difficult. I could say that some things are new and then you'll never hear them again, but you know, there are a lot of these apps that are very similar to TikTok, that have really become quite popular, partly because President Trump said he was going to ban TikTok and it didn't happen. So Bunch, very similar to House Party. House Party appeared years ago, came back during COVID because it was a way you could have quizzes with people who weren't in your house and things like that. Triller, very similar to TikTok, and also Reels at the bottom there. Reels is part of Instagram, and it's Instagram's attempt to be like TikTok. So you'll probably have children talking about that. And Byte, some of you probably remember Vine, which were the little sort of 6-second video clips that you could get on Twitter, which stopped actually. But Byte is an attempt to sort of recreate some of that. I'm going to stop. I know I've thrown an awful lot of information at you in a short space of time. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions, and I can see that there are some. I hope that's been helpful. I was saying to Sarah this morning, you know, I had so many slides and I took them away and then put some back because there's always so much to try and include. But I do hope it's helpful. I'll share all of this with you. My email address is there. And if you do, you know, have any questions or need any more information, then please just let me know. Ian, shall I just have a look at the questions and try and go through some of them? Is that the best?
That'll be absolutely great. Yeah, it's superb presentation as usual, Carl, and I guarantee that all of us, or lots of us, will have been scribbling down all the things that we don't do and are suitably frightened to death, as we always are after one of your sessions, but incredibly helpful.
Is there any specific advice regarding parents giving their consent to school for a member of staff having their personal phone number in the member of staff's mobile device? Would it not be easier to be able to say only, yeah, well, yes. So I think, yes, we have had instances around that. The guidance on safer working practices, and also a piece of guidance from DFE, which I'm very happy to share with you. The DFE piece was called Cyberbullying Supporting School Staff. It very specifically says in there that, you know, staff shouldn't be having to use their own personal devices to contact parents. And it says if you do want to contact parents, it should be done from a school device. Now, I've spoken to some ed teachers who've said to me, well, it's only guidance, it's not statutory. When it's statutory, then I'll enforce it. But what I always say to people, and some of you have heard me say this before, so I apologize, is you know, when something goes wrong, if it goes wrong, somebody is going to pour all over our policies. And if we haven't followed the guidance, and it might just be guidance, people are going to say, why didn't you follow the DFE guidance? You know, why did you think you were different? So I think my sort of response to that is, you know, it is so much easier, and it protects members of staff as well as parents and pupils if there is that clear boundary between personal and professional. And that's why I think, you know, we need to be using a school device. I think if there was an exceptional circumstance, and there can always be one of those, I think it needs to be documented. I think somebody on the senior management team needs to, you know, be able to sort of endorse what is happening. Jackie has said, can you talk more about live online lessons? We stuck to the NEU guidance and avoided this except for exceptional cases in lockdown 1. Yeah, I was aware about the guidance that the NEU had given, and I think there's a lot of schools who are telling me that they're being put under pressure to do this by parents. I mean, and you know, that shouldn't be what drives it. I think what we need to be doing is providing as good and robust an experience, an educational experience for children. And I said at the beginning, I think there was a big difference between emergency, you know, remote teaching, which is what people went to on the 23rd of March, and actually online learning, which looks very, very different, and I think which takes an awful lot of time to put in place and get right. And I think it's not always straightforward just to sort of transfer what I was going to do in front of the class onto some sort of online platform. And I think, you know, in terms of how we do it, I do think it can be done carefully and safely, but I think, you know, it needs to be really carefully planned. And I think the schools who got this right, they ended up almost delivering, you know, their usual curriculum, their usual timetable through Teams or Zoom. But that didn't come easy. And I think what we also have to remember is that some children just can't engage with that in the same way. So I think, you know, it needs to have a real in-depth whole school approach. And of course, the DFE sort of, you know, putting these things in place this term and saying we've got to be able to provide, you know, this sort of blended learning approach. I think that's all very well, but it doesn't just happen overnight. So I think some of that guidance, especially from places like the London Grid for Learning and Kent, is well worth looking at.
Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everybody.